Hello and welcome everybody. Greetings from Graz, Austria. My name is Michael Goller and today I have the pleasure to talk to you about digital identities and connected products and some of the use cases that we enable with our connected product cloud Atma.io. But don't worry, this is not going to be a sales pitch and a collection of marketing slides that we'll walk through in the next 15 minutes, but actually I want to talk about some of the fundamental concepts around the digital identities and other mechanisms that we have put in place to enable those use cases on our platform. Before we get into it, a couple of words about myself. I joined Avery, Dennison and the Atma.io initiative almost to the day exactly 2 years ago. And ever since, it has been a fantastic journey working with partners, working with customers out there to enable connected products in a variety of different industries. And today I also want to show you some examples of what that actually means and how things work in practice. So now let's get into it. And I want to actually start by kind of level setting and putting out some definitions on how we see what a digital identity is. And for this purpose, I want to start with the physical product, as everybody is well familiar with as a consumer. So every time you go into a grocery store to buy a bottle of water or to buy in an apparel store to buy a t-shirt, and we are all familiar with the different labels and the different identifiers that we as an industry put on products simply for the purpose of making them identifiable. This all started with the very first barcode that I believe was put on a product in 1974 to make it machine readable on the POS desk. And over time, this what we call portfolio of digital triggers has evolved with other technologies like UHF RFID, QR codes, NFC tags, to next generation technologies like passive Bluetooth. And what those things in essence do is they are making products identifiable through machines in a more or less automated way. Some of these technologies work at what the GS1 would call the class or product level, and some of these technologies are going a step beyond that, providing items with a unique serialized identifier. But still, none of this comprises, in our definition and in our worldview, a digital identity. It merely serves as the entry point to that, and it's merely an identifier to recognize a specific product. So instead of this kind of identification concept, think of it what the actual identity of a product is. And the actual identity is a set of information that really describes the characteristics of a product. And this encompasses things like, where does the product actually come from? So where was it really manufactured? Which waypoints did it take across the global supply chain? And what impact did it leave across this journey? What are the materials that went into it? And how can I recycle it, for example, as a consumer? And other questions like, is the product authentic? Is it real? Can I trust the brand that produced this product, and can I use this safely in my environment? And all this information together is what we define as the digital identity, like the true self that describes a unique product. So think of an analogy in this case. The analogy here is you and me, like as people, as a person. Everybody has an ID card and a passport, and those passports are nothing but an identifier. They hold a number that make us identifiable to other people out there. But the passport is not our identity. Our identity is our set of unique experiences, our connections to other people, everything that we have experienced in our life kind of makes us up as a person. And so similarly apply this thinking to a product, basically covering everything that ever happened to this product that now defines its identity and its true self. So with this kind of broader definition, I also want to bring up a point that I think is important to understand when we talk about having different kind of trigger technologies and digital triggers on a specific product. And just recently I visited an apparel store where I saw items and I was happy to learn that they carry an RFID tag. I saw that they carry a QR code and also an NFC tag, and I, as a curious consumer, tried to interact with those different things. And each of those triggers, like the QR code and the NFC tag, led me to a specific but not connected experience. And so one way that we think is important to bear in mind is that the digital identity, like irrespective of the trigger, is what you as a consumer should be able to tap into when you interact with products. And it all should be based on one source of truth, irrespective of the trigger that's being used to access it. And by means of that, brands can decide which trigger kind of shows and highlights what specific information, but it's still based on a single source of truth about the information on this digital identity. So this kind of summarizes and highlights the way we think about digital identities as the generalization of not just putting a serialized code on an item, but really capturing everything that happens to that item over its entire life cycle. And with this, I want to segue into the second important concept that we have built into our platform also as one of the core capabilities, which is kind of called the event state duality. And I want to stick to our example of the blue t-shirt that we saw earlier. So think of a facility, a factory where a t-shirt is produced, different labels, different digital triggers are applied to it. And as part of the process, it's also captured the different manufacturing steps. And finally, the t-shirt is packed into a box and leaves the factory. From a kind of data perspective, what happens is that actually the factory, by interacting with the t-shirt, generates a series of data points, an event stream that we kind of can translate into the digital identity of this particular item. So think of this as over time, by ingesting an event stream, you build up the state, you build up the digital identity of a particular item to really capture the information around when and where it was produced, what the materials are that went into it, what are the different steps that it went through, and so forth, to kind of over time build its characteristics and build its identity. And in this way of looking at it, you'll see that the event stream that is being generated as part of the journey through this like different processes and the value chain, these events are dual to the state of that particular item at any given moment in time. So in a way, you can translate the one thing back into the other and back and forth. But there's also another lens that you can apply to this. So while this like state of the item obviously describes its digital identity, there's also a supply chain centric view you can take to this. And there's a vast variety of systems that actually have been designed and built to capture the state of the supply chain rather than the state and identity of this particular item. And those systems are widely used, obviously, to run supply chains in an efficient way and make sure that products are put in front of the consumer at the right moment in time. But they don't have this consumer focus. And the most important fact around this is that we need to start as an industry, we need to start capturing information in a holistic way about individual items and individual products and make it accessible to the consumer. Because this is ultimately what the consumer cares about, and this is what consumers base their purchase decision on. So the one key takeaway from this slide really, the digital identity about the item is the base for the communication with the consumer, and it can also inform the existing like tools, operations, and processes that drive the supply chains of this world. So in other words, by ingesting an event stream, translating it into a state for an item, in turn, we can also generalize this and derive the state for the value chain, meaning that if we know where all items are and in which condition they are at the moment, we also have a concrete picture of how the supply chain looks like and how products are moving across. So if we now take this concept and generalize it a bit more into more technical terms, then we have kind of the same elements that we can denote as, on the one hand side, an event or data source that produces this event stream. And we, with our Atma.io platform, can ingest this event stream and update the state of each and every digital identity, aggregate the information to enrich it and enrich the characteristics, and then also derive state for auxiliary systems in this ecosystem. And those auxiliary systems, again, could be the ERP and warehouse management systems of this world that have this supply chain centric view onto the particular ecosystem. And the core functionalities that we kind of employ with the platform is, on the one hand side, ingesting this event stream like at a high scale. If you think about global supply chains, we're talking billions and billions of events. So ingesting this event and data stream is kind of the starting point of the functionality, but then also aggregating and transforming this into the actual state of those digital identities is one of the core capabilities to persist that and then also be able to serve this information in an appropriate way to other parties of this ecosystem. And those could be the data sinks, in other words, the other systems that are out there, but it could also be like event or state clients on very generic terms. That could be the end consumer, that could be an operator in a supply chain who needs specific information in real time along the way. So think of it like whenever a specific event happens, you can trigger workflows that inform specific clients and specific data things in real time. Now, closing the loop to why we called our platform Atma.io. It's not an acronym, but the word actually is something that we borrowed from the Sanskrit language, and it stands for the soul or the true self of an item, which I think is really encompassing and highlighting that we manage this digital identity that represents the true self of an item for each object that runs through a supply chain, with the ability to serve that information to the different stakeholders along the way. And if we now kind of take this abstract and technical concept and map it out to specific use cases, then you'll see how that whole thing can make sense and how that all is brought to life. So think of the typical supply chain that you would see in apparel, that you would see in food, that you would see in other industries. Essentially, each waypoint where people and machines and processes interact with items can be viewed as an event stream, as a data source generating events that we are capturing and ingesting on our platform to, on the one hand side, update the stage of each identity, and then also update the state, for example, from a more supply chain centric view. And I want to touch on two specific use cases among the wide variety of use cases that we enable by means of that. And the first one I want to touch on, which is actually one of the, I would call it the fundamental use cases around transparency and visibility. By knowing really on an item level where each individual item is in your supply chain at any given moment in time, by knowing the condition and the current actual physical state of that item being measured, for example, by different sensor devices, really gives you this end-to-end transparency and also enables you to kind of tell the consumer that the products that they are about to purchase have been produced fairly, contain sustainable materials, they have been shipped in a responsible way across the globe, to really give them the level of comfort and build a kind of long-lasting and trusted relationship with that consumer. So this transparency and visibility use case that many people in the industry are striving for is really brought to the next level with the approach and the mechanisms that we have outlined earlier in the talk. And the second use case, to make it really tangible, I want to talk a little bit more about how consumers can utilize the information in order to be part of a circular economy use case. So think of an item that you're kind of tired of, that you would like to get rid of. Usually it's kind of a big task for you as a consumer to identify, where can I return this item? Is this recyclable? Where do I need to put it so that it gets properly recycled? With this concept of capturing this digital identity of a product, it's vitally important that we can communicate this information to the consumer and make it available in the easiest possible way. So once you as a consumer decide you're tired of an item and you want to return it, you can simply interact with the item, scanning its QR code or tapping its NFC tag, and then find all the information that is relevant to this specific item. What does it contain? Where can you return it? Where can you recycle it? And then you ship it out or return it at the store, like wherever you want, to kind of be part of this circular economy. And the next step, which then happens, is that the next stage in the supply chain, in this case, the sorting and recycling facilities, of course, also need to know what's the material composition so that we can use the correct recycling process. We need to know what's kind of the physical condition and state of this item. Is it still good? Can we maybe resell it? Do we have to recycle it? So all of that is actually captured in the digital identity of this item. and really making use of the information that we've captured over its entire life cycle. Really fueling not only new applications and use cases, but entire new business model that help us to be a more circular economy. So now really going into one specific example here, kind of interactive for you as an audience as well. If you have your smartphone handy, then please go ahead and scan this QR code, which will lead you to a specific page of the product that you see here on the screen. And this really is to demonstrate a couple of points. So on the one hand side, you could say, hey, but Michael, this is just like a QR code that directs me to a website. What's so hard about this? Why do I need a digital identity for it? And in essence, you're right. It's a website that like probably anybody can build, and a QR code that redirects to it. But if you think about this at scale, it's billions of items in today's world that are being pumped through supply chains, and the information that you want and need as a consumer are very, very specific to this one item. So in the end, it's like managing a vast variety of different data pools and data sets that are all connected to this one physical item that you as a consumer interact with. And bringing this all together, enabling those different use cases from be able to resell it or return it somewhere or even donate it, really depend on the one specific unit that you hold in your hand, and not just on a generic web page that you would see on each and every web shop today. So by thinking about the scale at which this needs to operate, I think it becomes more clear that you need a different approach of managing data, and this model of the digital identity to capture this information and like enrich and nurture information is really driving it home here. The second example I want to touch upon is actually using a completely different industry, and there is some urgency of it still being in a global pandemic, being able to capture and manage the state of medicine, being able to tell patients that this medicine has been stored and transported according to all the regulations and standards that are out there is one key element that you can also enable with this very same concept. Monitoring its temperature and making this information available to a wide variety of people and stakeholders along this value chain is important. And obviously you as the patient who gets a vaccine shot ultimately would like to know and would like to have certainty that this has been treated with care, that all the regulations have been like adhered to, and this is safe for you to take. And so this layers on top a element of capturing additional information, and still it all feeds into this concept of a digital identity that makes the product, in this case the medicine, connected to you as a consumer, but also really encompasses all the information that you need at the moment in time before you actually get vaccinated. So it's another example of how this concept is really being brought to life. And if you think about the hundreds of millions of medicine doses out there, if you think about the billions of products that we kind of employ in today's supply chain, then I think that kind of illustrates the scale at which this needs to operate. With that, I want to zoom out a little bit again and kind of wrap it up for today. So we've talked a little bit about the different concepts that we employ, from what is a digital identity to how do we manage the different events and states on a platform to make it globally accessible to a wide variety of use cases. And if you kind of bucket things on a very high level, what we enable with this is really use cases to drive end-to-end traceability and visibility, to help brands and consumers be more sustainable, to help make sure that products are genuine and authentic, and to provide consumers with a new way to interact with products and provide very targeted experiences. I hope I could give you some insights into how those mechanisms on our platform work, and I would be more than happy to discuss with any one of you any questions you might have, so please feel free to reach out, and looking forward to a fruitful conversation. Thanks for your time, thanks for your attention, and looking forward to catching up with you. Thanks and take care.